The Battle of the Olive Grove of Kountouras took place in the summer of 1205 in Messenia in the Peloponnese peninsula, between the Frankish Crusaders and the local Greeks, resulting in a victory of the Frankish knights and the collapse of the local resistance. In 1204, Constantinople, the capital city of the Byzantine Empire, was taken by the Crusaders of the Fourth Crusade and the Republic of Venice. This led to the collapse of the Byzantine Empire and the establishment of the Latin Empire. Meanwhile, a Crusader force of between 500 and 700 knights under the command of William of Champlitte and Geoffrey of Villehardouin advanced into the Peloponnese to deal with Byzantine resistance. In the Olive Grove of Kountouras in Messenia, they confronted an army of around 5,000 Peloponnesian Greeks under the command of a certain Michael. In the ensuing battle, the Crusaders emerged victorious, forcing the Byzantines to retreat and crushing resistance in the Peloponnese. This battle paved the way for the foundation of the Principality of Achaia. Background: the army of the Fourth Crusade conquered Constantinople on the 12th of April 1204. One of the main leaders of the crusade, Boniface of Montferrat, having lost the opportunity to become emperor, went on to found the Kingdom of Thessalonica. That autumn, William of Champlitte followed him to Thessalonica but then continued south until he reached the Morea. There he was joined by Geoffrey of Villehardouin, who had sailed to Modena on his way back from Palestine. But Geoffrey of Villehardouin had entered the service of a local Greek magnate against his rivals, and had gained the impression that the country was easy to take. When the magnate died, his son broke off the alliance with him, but Villehardouin, learning that the Crusaders under Boniface were besieging the Greek magnate Leosuros in Nauplia and the Acrocorinth in the northwest, set out to seek his aid. Boniface sought to retain him in his own service, but Villehardouin teamed up with his fellow Champenois, Champlitte, whom he enticed with tales of the richness of the land and with a pledge to recognize him as his lord. Boniface finally sanctioned their undertaking, and in charge of around 100 knights and several soldiers, Champlitte and Villehardouin set out together to conquer the Morea. The towns of Patras and Andravida fell without struggle, and at the latter Champlitte received the homage of the local magnates and people of the Scorta and Messenia. Further, the Franks moved south along the coast, accompanied by a fleet, easily taking the fortress of Ponticum, which they repaired and garrisoned. They bypassed the strong fortress of Arcadia, and passing through Navarino, arrived at Modena. They repaired the fortress walls, long ago torn down by the Venetians to stop its use as a pirate base, and assaulted the nearby fort of Corinth, which fell after a single day, and the town of Kalamata, which surrendered. The battle. At this point, the Greeks of Laconia and Arcadia, under the leadership of a certain Michael, tried to stop the Franks at the Olive Grove of Kountouras in northeastern Messenia. Modern scholars have traditionally identified this Michael with Michael I Komnenos Doukas, founder of the Despotate of Epirus, but this identification has been questioned more recently by Raymond Joseph Loenertz, as the fragile nature of his control over Epirus would have made a departure to aid the Moroid Greeks a major and unlikely gamble. The events of the conquest are narrated by two sources: the various versions of the Chronicle of the Morea, and on the conquest of Constantinople, by the Crusader Geoffrey of Villehardouin. According to the Chronicle, the Franks had between 700 men, while the Greeks had 4,000 mounted and on foot. The elder Villehardouin states that the army of Michael numbered 5,000 men and that of the Franks 500. The two sources also differ in the exact chronology of events, with the chronicle placing the battle after the Frankish capture of Kalamata, and the elder Villehardouin after the seizure of Modon. In any case, despite being outnumbered, the Franks, after a march of a single day, confronted the Greeks and won the battle. No details for which are given. The exact location of the Olive Grove of Kountouras in Messenia is unknown. The Greek version of the chronicle records, apart from the owner's name, a location named Kepescianus, while a variant form is recorded as Capsicia. Efforts have been made to identify the locality, with some linking it with the modern village of Capsia west of Mantinea in Arcadia, but this is too far from the reported area of the battle based on the sources, and furthermore olive trees do not grow in the region. In Geoffrey's own account, the battle is described thus: Sir William of Champlitte and Geoffrey of Villehardouin departed from the host, and took with them about 100 knights, and a great number of mounted sergeants, and entered into the land of Moria, and rode onwards till they came to the city of Modon. Michael heard that they were in the land with so few people, and he collected together a great number of people, a number that was marvelous, and he rode after them as one, thinking they were all no better than prisoners, and in his hand. And when they heard tell that he was coming, they refortified Modon, where the defences had long since been pulled down, and they left the baggage and the lesser folk. Then they rode out a day's march, and ordered their array with as many people as they had. But the odds seemed too great, for they had no more than 500 men mounted, whereas on the other part there were well over 5,000. But events happen as God pleases, for our people fought with the Greeks and discomfited and conquered them, and the Greeks lost very heavily, while those on our side gained horses and arms enough, and other goods in very great plenty, and so returned very happy, and very joyously, to the city of Modon. In the Greek version of the Chronicle of the Moria, the battle is described in verses 1720 to 1738. Kappa Omicron Upsilon Sigma Alpha Sigma Iota Nu Kappa Mu Alpha Theta Alpha Sigma Iota Nu Tau Pi Sigma Lambda Theta Alpha Nu Omicron Phi Rho Alpha Gamma Kappa Omicron Iota. They heard and they learned that the Franks had come. Kappa Alpha Pi Epsilon Rho Pi Alpha Tau Omicron Nu Kappa Tau Chi Omega Rho Iota Alpha Kappa Pi Alpha Iota Rho Nu Omicron Upsilon Sigma Iota Nu Tau Kappa Omicron Upsilon Rho Sigma Eta, and that they walked through the villages and took the gains of war. Kappa Alpha Epsilon Pi Alpha Nu Kappa Lambda Omicron Gamma Iota Sigma Alpha Nu Tau Omicron Nu Tau Omicron Sigma Chi Omicron Upsilon Nu Zeta Eta Mu Iota Omega Sigma Epsilon Iota. And they said and they thought they had been harmed. Kappa Epsilon Sigma Epsilon Pi Alpha Rho Epsilon Sigma Upsilon Rho Theta Eta Kappa Alpha Nu Tau Lambda Epsilon Gamma Omicron Upsilon Nu Kappa Eta Pi Eta Sigma Kappa Iota Alpha Nu Omicron Upsilon Sigma. Over that they were drawn. They call it Kepescianus Pi Omicron Upsilon Tau Kappa Rho Alpha Zeta Omicron Upsilon Nu Omicron Mu Alpha Sigma Tau Nu Kappa Omicron Upsilon Nu Tau Omicron Upsilon Rho Alpha Nu Lambda Alpha Iota Nu Alpha, where they name it the Olive Grove of Kountouras. Sigma Alpha Nu Chi Iota Lambda Iota Alpha Delta Epsilon Sigma Tau Epsilon Sigma Sigma Alpha Rho Epsilon Sigma Pi Epsilon Zeta Omicron Kappa Alpha Beta Alpha Lambda Lambda Alpha Rho Omicron Iota. They were 4,000 on foot and mounted. Omicron Phi Rho Alpha Gamma Kappa Omicron Iota Gamma Rho Sigma Tau Mu Alpha Theta Alpha Sigma Iota Nu Pi Alpha Lambda Epsilon Pi Tau Omicron Sigma Rho Omega Mu Alpha Iota Omicron Upsilon Sigma. The Franks, though, when they learned it from the Romans, Pi Omicron Upsilon Sigma Alpha Sigma Iota Nu Gamma Rho Mu Epsilon Tau alpha tau omicron sigma kappa Xi epsilon upsilon rho alpha sigma iota nu tau omicron sigma tau omicron pi omicron upsilon sigma, since they were together with them and they knew the place. Kappa epsilon tau omicron sigma pi alpha rho epsilon sigma upsilon rho alpha nu lambda theta alpha nu kappa alpha eta rho alpha nu epsilon tau omicron upsilon sigma. They drew them, they came and they found them. Kappa alpha pi omicron lambda epsilon mu omicron nu delta omega kappa alpha sigma iota nu omicron phi rho alpha gamma kappa omicron iota kappa omicron rho omega mu alpha omicron iota. And war they gave the Franks and the Romans. Kappa omicron phi rho alpha gamma kappa omicron iota gamma rho omicron kappa sigma alpha sigma iota nu pi epsilon zeta omicron kappa alpha beta alpha lambda lambda alpha rho omicron iota. And the Franks were not on foot and mounted. Mu omicron nu omicron iota phi tau alpha kappa omicron sigma iota omicron iota mu omicron nu alpha I omicron iota tau omicron sigma omicron upsilon sigma tau omicron sigma gamma nu omega mu iota alpha sigma alpha nu. But just 700 that many they thought. Mu epsilon pi rho omicron theta upsilon mu iota alpha nu rho chi alpha sigma iota nu tau nu pi omicron lambda epsilon mu omicron rho omega mu alpha omicron iota. Eagerly did the Romans start the war. Delta iota alpha tau lambda iota gamma omicron upsilon sigma tau omicron sigma beta lambda epsilon pi alpha nu sigma tau epsilon rho alpha mu epsilon tau epsilon nu omicron sigma alpha nu. Because they saw them few, but later they were sorry. Tau iota nu sigma lambda epsilon gamma omega tau pi omicron lambda lambda kappa alpha tau tau delta iota alpha phi omicron rho omicron nu mu omicron upsilon. Why shall I tell you a lot, and what do we care? Tau nu pi omicron lambda epsilon mu omicron nu kappa epsilon rho delta iota of sigma alpha nu tau omicron tau epsilon kappa epsilon nu omicron phi rho alpha gamma kappa omicron iota. The war they won. Then those Franks lambda omicron upsilon sigma kappa alpha tau alpha sigma phi alpha Xi alpha sigma iota nu lambda iota gamma omicron iota tau omicron sigma phi upsilon gamma alpha nu. They slaughtered them all. A few did escape. Alpha tau nu kappa alpha mu omicron nu pi omicron lambda epsilon mu omicron nu pi omicron kappa alpha nu omicron rho omega mu alpha omicron iota. That was the only war the Romans made. Epsilon sigma tau nu kappa alpha iota rho nu pi omicron kappa epsilon rho delta iota of sigma alpha nu omicron phi rho alpha gamma kappa omicron iota tau nu mu omicron rho epsilon alpha nu. During the time that the Franks won the Morea, aftermath, the Battle of the Olive Grove of Kountouras was decisive for the conquest of the Peloponnese by the Franks, as it represented the last general effort of the local Greeks to resist. The eminent historian of Frankish Greece, William Miller, likened the battle to a Hastings of the Morea, writing that the fate of the Morea, like that of Saxon England, was decided by a single-pitched battle. After the victory, the Crusaders rested for a while in the rich plain of Messenia. Champlitte called a council of war to determine the future strategy, and sent the fleet which until then had accompanied them home. In late 1205 or 1206, the Crusaders went on to capture Arcadia, whose siege lasted for some time, as well as the fortress of Arcloven, whose resistance was led by the celebrated warrior Doxopates Vousaras. By this time, the entire northern and western of the peninsula was under the rule of Champlitte. The northwest belonged to the Duchy of Athens under the suzerainty of Boniface of Montferrat. Although Leosauros and his men still held out in the two fortresses, and Laconia and the mountains of the Taygetus and Zarconia remained still unsubdued. Nevertheless, the first stage of the Frankish conquest was complete, and in a letter to Pope Innocent III on the 19th of November 1205, Champlitte claimed for himself the title Princeps Totia Saccharii Provincii, establishing a new state, the Principality of Achaia.